Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. We are back with another Neurodiversity Stories, and we have another absolutely tremendous guest today. We have Andrew Wilmot, who is going to be talking to us all about software and dyspraxia around neurodiversity, and it's going to be absolutely incredible. So please stick around and join in the conversation. And if there is any questions throughout this talk, then please just drop them in the chat box below, and let us know again, as always, where you are tuning in from. As always, we can't do this without you and the amazing impact that you have. So guys, I also want to say a massive thank you as well to everyone that has been a previous guest on this and all the people that are lined up to be guests coming forward. So please stick around. It's going to be a phenomenal show, and I cannot wait to welcome Andrew on there. So I want to say a massive thank you as well to our sponsor, Sweet Social Media, who have been absolutely phenomenal. And please do check them out. They actually do social media. So they do social media marketing management, video marketing packages, digital marketing consultancy, social media marketing training, build your personal brand, and bespoke packages. And they have an incredible course coming up. I just want to show you this. Could you vlog every day for 365 days? Okay, so we know this could be a bit extreme, but did you know that vlogging can help build many businesses and also a personal brand? So the question I'm asking is, would you like to be more confident in front of the camera? Would you like to build a strong personal brand and also your business? You can do this by sharing your knowledge of your business and the person behind the brand. In this course, we will show you how we went from being shy in front of the camera to vlogging every day for 365 days, and how this has helped become a thought leader in the industry. Click on the link, book your place, and come and join us. So guys, the link for that course and all of what our sponsor do will be in the blurb, and it will be on the comments below. But the actual main event today, guys, is to welcome Andrew. So guys, sit back, drink your coffee, eat your biscuits, and come and join this conversation as we welcome Andrew. Good morning, Andrew. Thank you so much for being a guest on Neurodiversity Stories. How are you this morning?
I'm great, thank you. And thank you for having me.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Are you hearing me loud and clear?
I am, loud and clear. It's wonderful to have you. Andrew, I would love for the people that don't follow you on social media and see all the remarkable work that you do, could you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So I'm an agile delivery manager. I like to say I've got half a decade experience facilitating agile and 3 decades experience being dyspraxic. But what I do is a real combination of high-level project management, managing the ways an organization works, and coaching those ways of working. Now, I do have to give a little disclaimer here. These views are my own. They're not reflective of any official stance of my employer, and I've been fortunate to work with and be mentored by some real amazing agile experts, both inside and outside my company. Some of the points I'm going to make are going to be a little bit controversial with them. So, but I think they're important points to make in the context of neurodiversity in the workplace.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for sharing that. So you mentioned around kind of neurodiversity. What's your kind of your story? As in, what was kind of, were you diagnosed? Did you know of this as a small child, a late diagnosis as an adult? Did you go down the diagnosed path? What was the kind of the journey for you on this one, Andrew?
So I was very fortunate to be diagnosed at a very young age. I think it was 7. And so basically, as long as I remember, I've known that I've been dyspraxic, and my primary school was fantastic in terms of getting me support, and so was my secondary school, and then my university. So I've been in the incredibly privileged position to be supported, not just in terms of active adaptation. So, for instance, I had what was called an Alpha Smart, which is a type of electronic typewriter at the secondary school, but also have a lot of coaching, SEN support all through those years. And in a way, that's sort of made me joining the workforce take me a little bit by surprise. So a story that I like to tell is I showed up for an internship interview. This would have been during my second year of university. And I communicated the fact that I've got a lot of difficulties writing, and that any sort of exam, I would need some sort of electronic way of doing this exam. Now, I sat down and I got a written exam. And I was fortunate enough to, again, have had the coaching that I've had over the years by this point, to have the confidence to basically run through the exam in my head. When the next interviewer came around, as a multi-stage interview process, I sat them down and said, look, I've not written the exam. I mentioned that I needed XYZ adjustments. That hasn't been done, but I can walk you through the exam, walk you through the answers and the methodology to get to those answers. And I did. That's exactly what I did. And actually, sort of in response to this, during the internship itself, I set up a couple of workshops for just practicing in the workplace, inspired by that. Shock's the wrong word, but surprise of expecting an adjustment that then wasn't there and having to adapt the process. Now, I'm very aware that a lot of people who weren't so fortunate as to have had the level of support over the years that I've had, would have seen that and panicked. The workshops themselves were a great success. A lot of people were coming in and saying, look, I've never been diagnosed. You'll know that availability for diagnosis has massively changed over the last few decades. I think I was really the first generation where you had quite wide, and there's still a lot of improvements to be made in terms of access to diagnoses, but quite wide access to diagnoses. Whereas a lot of the people that I was then in the workplace with were like, I've always thought I might be dyspraxic. I always thought I might be dyslexic or have ADHD, but the resources were never there for me to find out. And off the back of this, I rejoined after finishing university, and we actually set up the first, with one of the people who was inspired by that workshop to go and investigate, and found out that yes, this whole time they weren't, that there wasn't something inherently wrong with them. They were neurodivergent, and they were then able to get the tools and techniques to adapt to that, as opposed to sort of winging it and trying to figure it out themselves. But somebody who was inspired by that workshop, I then worked with them to set up the specific learning difficulties working group, which is a networking, events, sort of internal group representing people like us. And yeah, from then, I then got into, so I started a grad scheme, which was it was a software engineering grad scheme. Off the back of that, I got into facilitating agile methodologies. So I'm sure we'll cover what agile is in a minute, and then that's what I've been doing the last few years.
That's incredible, and it's amazing, isn't it? Really, Andrew, that kind of bravery. And you probably won't. If someone said you're brave, you'll probably think, well, actually, no, I'm not brave. I'm just doing this. But genuinely, that bravery to stand out and start making these differences and these changes, as you can see, just listening to your story, what you've been able to do and the people that you've been helped. And I think that's the incredible thing that stands the test of time. Really, is that it starts with yourself, and then it's a case of actually, how can I help? How can I do this? How can I expand? And that's been obviously must have been an incredible journey so far for you.
Yes, definitely. I do prefer to frame it in my own mind as I'm privileged to be able to, and I definitely think if you've got the capability to be able to shift the needle on some of these things, then I do think that you have a responsibility to, in your own way. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to be go set up workshops on neurodiversity at your employer, but if you are confident and feel that you have the psychological safety to be able to speak out on these things, then I do think it's important too.
How would someone go about trying to do something similar to, and rightfully so? You mentioned about whether they're in that kind of place to be able to do this and support that side of it. How would you say then, if someone is in their organization and they want to do something similar, how do you feel? And again, this is just advice. It's not this is not set in stone advice. But how do you say that they would go forward to start implementing these things?
I think the first thing you need to do is have the conversation. See who about you is going to be interested. Book a, if you're in a large office where you can book meeting rooms, book a meeting room. Send out an email to whatever distribution list is for your floor or office, inviting people just to come have lunch and let's talk about it. Now, that off the back of that, that's where you're going to get the ideas of where to go next. Where I was, we were fortunate enough that we already had a wider disability working group. And so I was able to meet with some really fantastic people from there. And they effectively told me, look, just put together a slide, book a meeting room. We'll distribute the invites across our distribution list, across this disability working group, and see who shows up. And as I say, it went really well. They also organized the live streaming of it across the company intranet and getting it on like the screens in the lobby, advertising for people to come see. But just inviting people for an open conversation really is the first step.
So the power really is in the team around you that you can help deliver this.
Yeah.
Sorry. I just kind of wanted to mention. You mentioned about an exam very early on in this conversation. You mentioned about an exam, and it was a multitude of exams. It wasn't just one. It was just something. How did that process go? Because I can remember when I was back in the retail days, when I was regional manager, and I was going through what basically felt like jumping hoops, so to speak. To I had 3 days where I had to go up to Birmingham in the UK, and I was set an exam and then an interview, and there was so many different things that you had to do throughout those 3 days. And this was for myself, undiagnosed dyslexia, and I remember the sheer exhaustion that I experienced at that time. On day 2, I literally became more or less non-verbal because the length of the intensity of doing these things over that short period of time was, I felt, to me, quite agonizing, to be honest. And I'm not saying it's that level, but how, and people I've spoken to before have said this: if something is thrown at you and you've just got a multitude of these things, we can do them. It's not a case that we can't do them. But how did that? Are you okay with that kind of process, or did you find that process more tricky? I know you found a solution to say that you walked it through a different way, but is that because you've had experience before, or was that just a case of this is how I'm able to do this?
So I hadn't had previous experience of having to walk an interviewer through a written exam that I didn't write, but I was fortunate enough to have had lots of coaching and be able to adapt. 1 second, I've suddenly started getting a lot of feedback on your microphone there. Okay, that's much better. That's much better. Yes, excellent. But yeah, so this is going back a few years ago now, but this was, it was a real multi-stage, but it was all in one day. So it is very intense. It was the written exam followed by a one-on-one interview, followed by a group exercise, followed by a second group exercise, followed by a final one-on-one interview. Now, we can definitely be guilty at times of assuming that our experiences, neurodivergent people, applies universally, but it doesn't. And so whilst I was okay with that, I'm aware that is a position of privilege to be okay with that, and a lot of people who would make fantastic interns, make fantastic employees, would really struggle with that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and it does go back to the fact that if I was to talk about dyslexia, so to speak, and my dyslexia is different to someone else has dyslexia, and so on and so on and so on. And then we as we go further afield, there's certain things that I feel more comfortable doing than necessarily than others do. So we have to understand that everyone is different, within this inside of it. It's just interesting when we look at the corporate structure of interviews and processes and things. And I remember speaking to someone who worked in the banking industry, and I won't mention the name, but genuinely they said that their process was very long-winded and probably not the technical term, but it was a very long process. And throughout the process of this interviewing stage of joining the bank, there was so many people that would just drop off purely because of maybe it was a psychometric test or all of these different things. So it's just interesting, isn't it, that when we look at things like exams and we have to kind of, in interviews, we have to start thinking about how can we make this more inclusive.
It could be as simple as taking the exact same number of steps, but spread it over 2 days. They were already paying for the train and the hotel room. The cost of losing somebody who could potentially be an amazing employee just because you tried to squeeze that many events into 1 day is going to be much greater than the cost of 1 more day's stay in a hotel room.
Andrew, that is such an amazing point, because if someone's sitting here and thinking, okay, my organization needs to change my recruitment process, they need to change how we onboard, how we do all of these different things, and how do we do this? We look at this. What you've just mentioned is that the simplicity of time. If we just took what we had and then we were able to kind of expend the actual time to take the pressure off and explain it more and do these things. Now, I'm not saying that, yes, there's certain systems that can be put in place and things as well, but it's interesting, isn't it? That 1 day becomes the 2 day, which leaves rest periods and leaves to analyze it in a different way. I guess I've never really personally thought of that. So that's been a learning curve for me.
Yeah. Everywhere's got so much focus on the 2 ends of the pipeline, getting people, and it's not just neurodivergence, but other characteristics who might be underrepresented to apply, and then thinking that magically that will then correspond to more people at the end. There's a fantastic organization. I don't know if they still exist anymore, but they used to probably still do work with students, working with disabled students, helping them get internships and grad schemes. Employability, it was called. And I always thought that too, that they were great at coaching people through the initial application. So, and again, just like with the interview stage, a lot of these applications it's quite process oriented. You've got to fill this out, then fill this out. Here's a cover letter. You've got to answer a load of questions. You've got a psychometric test, as you explained, and that can be very emotionally intense. They were great at that side, but I always thought that why aren't they encouraging companies to, if they're going to have these assessment center days, split them up over longer periods of time, and let people see what you're going to ask them in advance. You don't have to then, send it off as a written exam and you then show up with your printed copy, but just the topic areas to reduce that anxiety and overwhelmingness and that emotional intensity. It's like my answer to tell me a time that you overcome a challenge is not going to change. But somebody who really struggles with being put on the spot would really benefit from seeing that question in advance and being able to prepare an answer. And that's a sort of accommodation that's great for everybody. That's not just good for the neurodiverse. That's good for neurotypical people as well. It's a way of leveling the playing field in a way that actually does benefit everybody.
Why do you think we are very guarded around the interview questions? And I know lots of change since back in the day when I was going for interviews in things, and obviously the thing. Why do you think that Why do you think that is? Why do you think there's this guarded on? We have a set of questions, and we know that for the next hour or however long the interview is going to be, it's just going to be questions where you're going to more or less have to think on the spot.
So it's important now to state that recruitment isn't my area of expertise.
No.
But I think a lot of it is to do with a feeling that we need to get a candidate who knows these things deep enough that they can answer it off the top of their heads, without that sort of preparation. And again, that might be true for somebody who is neurotypical, who, if you ask them about an area that they are an expert in, they will be able to just elaborate at length and do it on the spot. But that's not reflective of somebody whose neurodivergence manifests in a way that makes it very difficult for them to give those answers on the spot. And I think for a lot of people, but I think the argument that we need an expert who understands this area so well that they can give these answers unprepared, I think that's a shaky argument to begin with. But I think it's outright false when it comes to looking at neurodiverse potential employees.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Andrew. And apologies for throwing that question out there on this. So tell me about, how did you get into your line of work? Was it something that you've always had a passion for? Is it something you've driven for in that sense? Tell me a little bit about how that kind of journey went. How did you get into the line of work you do now?
So I was very fortunate that the team or organization that I first joined at my employer was highly what we call agile mature. So it's probably worth explaining what I mean by agile in the first place. And this can be a difficult thing because agile is difficult to define in any way that will get a consensus, even amongst the agile community. But to go almost as high level as it can get, it's a working philosophy that emphasizes adaptability and discovering better ways of working. It came about from a 2001 document called the Manifesto for Agile Software Development, which was in response to the then typical ways of developing software. It's since started to grow outside of just software development. So I've not read the latest State of Agile report, but the last few ones have been showing that non-development adoption of Agile is skyrocketing. Off the back of that, there's various methodologies. So, by the way, there's no Agile org that defines what is Agile and what isn't. And there's various methodologies which are considered Agile, but then, such as Scrum, you might have heard of, Kanban, XP. I'm even going to get told off for calling Kanban an Agile methodology here. That's the sort of level of dispute within the Agile community. To scaling methodologies, trying to make it work better for larger organizations. And even outside of explicitly Agile organizations, things like stand-ups have entered common usage. Stand-ups being the sort of regular sync meeting. But yeah, so I joined a team that was highly Agile mature. And that, when I say Agile mature, I mean they were working in a very Agile way. So great with adaptability, great at constantly discovering better ways of working. And I kind of took it for granted, to be quite honest. I was like, it's my first job out of university. This is great. Then we underwent a reorganization. We joined with another organization that was further behind in the Agile journey. So those of your listeners that have any familiarity with Jira, which is a piece of software that's used for tracking work, will know my pain when I say that we had a line in a spreadsheet that said to update our Jira. And actually, the idea is that you use Jira as your source of information. And so I went from a very highly Agile mature organization to a very Agile immature one, and I really struggled. I was struggling with having this worst of both worlds, and everybody was struggling. But there was an alignment with the difficulties that I faced due to my neurodiversity and the difficulties we're facing as an organization due to our Agile immaturity. So I started leading the charge to drive up our Agile maturity, and off the back of that, I got my current role.
That's incredible. And For the people that are listening, on how does, because it's software, is in what you do, how does that software kind of work, in the sense of you don't have to go through a complete breakdown in that sense, but how does it work and benefit people?
How agile helps software development.
Yes.
Okay. So software development it's not like building a bridge. Even if you know what it is you want to build, there's a lot of uncertainty to getting there. In the past, and I'm saying way in the past, what was done is you would define everything up front. You would define what you're going to do. You'd break it down into how you're going to do it, and it'd be very, very fixed. You'd document it all. You'd come up with this big scope document, and then you'd start. The problem is that's not accounting for the uncertainty. So the vast majority of software projects in general go significantly over time and budget. And this was getting out of control. What agile methodologies aim to do is often they'll get criticized, like, oh, agile is too uncertain, we need certainty. But actually, it reflects the reality that software development is an uncertain practice. You are constantly discovering what it is you're building and how is the best way to build it. And so applying the agile philosophy to software development, and all the different agile methodologies will attempt to do this in their own different ways. It removes that upfront, we're defining every single thing about this, and brings in we're going to discover how it is we do it. It's the difference between, say, if I tell you need to go from London to Glasgow, and then you've got to sit down and map yourself out every single turn, how long you're going to spend at every single stoplight, exactly which service stations are you going to stop at, and exactly how long are you going to spend there, what are you going to buy for your lunch on the journey, compared to putting it in your sat nav and, oh, there's been an accident on the way, so we're going to reroute you. It's that sort of difference.
Mentioning a trip to Glasgow or wherever it may be, and I have to start thinking about planning out every single stop and everything else. That's a big one on me. Andrew, what kind of problems have you found
with implementations in agile? So from an agile and the neurodivergent way, neurodivergent perspective, it's safe to say, and anybody listening who has worked in quote unquote agile organizations will be thinking that this sounds great in theory but falls apart in practice. I'm not going to go into the history of what has gone wrong in agile. There's an amazing collaborative document hosted by an agile consultancy, Naked Agility, called Agile for Decision Makers, which documents how big consultancy has done a lot of damage entering the agile services market without any real understanding of agile. But yeah, in a lot of places, it ends up being the implementation of a methodology that might have worked elsewhere, wholesale, without any consideration for the adaptation and continuous improvement that is really the driving force in agile. If we swapped clothes, what are the chances that my clothes would fit you and vice versa? My clothes fit me because they're tailored for me. I've chosen them. What works for me? I can't just decide, I like your wardrobe, Darren. I want to look like you. And so I'm just going to buy everything in the exact same size as well and hope that it just magically fits me. If it does, it's entirely due to chance. And to be clear, agile without consideration for adaptation and improvement is not agile any more than a Ferrari with its wheels removed is fast. But I will be referring to agile quite broadly here. And so particularly for the neurodivergent, badly implemented agile can cause major problems in a few ways. There's an American professor who I had a great conversation with a while back, who I'm not going to name, but he wrote a brilliant blog post called Agile Development, Ableist Extroverts Setting Agendas. And to quote directly from it, I have met too many good, even great, neurodiverse software developers who walked away from agile teams and employers. He highlights a few things that he's perceived as aspects of agile that are hostile to the neurodiverse. One of which is a really good example to dive into, is the stand-up. So I mentioned that the stand-up is that sync meeting. It's a frequent meeting where team members sync up on what they're working on. It can take lots of different forms, but the most common one is asynchronous, be it in person or over Zoom, meeting where everybody answers, what did I do yesterday? What am I doing today? And are there any blockers to what I'm doing? Now, for those who struggle with synchronous communication, those who struggle with being put on the spot, this can be hugely difficult. So if I get somebody to say they've just arrived, 9 a.m., what are you doing today? What did you do yesterday? What progress are you making? Now, even if they are fantastic, if they struggle with the emotional intensity of being put on the spot like that, then apart from them finding that difficult, it's going to be tough for them because they're always going to look like they're not doing anything. There's a sort of pressure to be speaking in the stand-up. It's very extroversion biased to show everybody that you are delivering value. Even worse, I've known teams that are in person to insist on it being a literal stand-up. The theory behind that being that it encourages team members to be brief, but taking people who might struggle with standing still, so that might be ADHD or similar disorders, or with dyspraxia, standing still and rather instead of fiddling can actually cause a lot of physical discomfort. Standing still for 30 minutes, waiting for your turn to be put on the spot is not great. And the cruelest thing is there's nothing in, so stand-ups as a concept come from the Scrum Guide. There's nothing in the Scrum Guide that says this has to be a synchronous meeting. It's entirely focused around what is the objective of this meeting. And that objective is an opportunity for inspection and adaptation towards what's called the sprint goal. So looking at what are we doing? Do we need to change what we're doing? What can we do to help each other do what we're doing? And so I had one team that was having significant problems with their stand-ups. So they were a very neurodiverse team. Several members were effectively non-verbal during the stand-ups. They're finding these incredibly stressful, and with a little bit of investigation, I found they were mitigating this by reading pre-written statements for the stand-up. Now, this is where I get controversial with some of my other members of the Agile community. So I worked with them to build an asynchronous stand-up agreement using a persistent Teams chat, going back to what is the objective of this meeting in the first place? And is there a way we can get to that objective in a way that works for these people? So they got the benefits of the stand-up in a way that better suited the neurodiversity of the team. That is the sort of adaptation that is supposed to be in Agile, but because I think there's two factors that would prevent that happening for the neurodiverse. One, a lot of Agile practitioners are very extroversion biased. Your coaches, your trainers. There's a position in Scrum called the Scrum Master, which is sort of hybrid coach. We call it servant leader, where you're supposed to be removing impediments and protecting the team from the whims of senior management. But these are all roles that are naturally quite extroversion focused. And so it can be easy for us to assume that because it works for us, it works for everybody. Because we're the expert, you see, we're the expert going out to coach the teams. And they'll be asking us what they should be doing. What we actually need to be doing is coaching the teams to discover the best way of working for themselves. And if teams with a lot of neurodiversity, that might not look like daily in-person, stand up for 30 minutes, be put on the spot type meetings.
What kind of things would you implement? What would not implement? What things would you like to see being implemented? And I know you mentioned about pre-written notes and the debrief on these things. Are there other things that can be implemented to support this that you can think of?
Ultimately, it's empowering the teams. If a team doesn't feel empowered to find their own best way of working, so they're constantly just expecting to be told the way that they're supposed to work. And that can happen in low trust organizations or organizations where they've perhaps I mentioned the issues with big consultancy and Agile. They've had a consultant in, They've given senior management a flash PowerPoint saying this is what you're doing, and then they've been expected to just shift their whole way of working. If teams aren't empowered to adapt to themselves, then it doesn't matter what I would look to introduce. I have a few ideas. So, for instance, there's another concept in Scrum called the retrospective. So at the end of every sprint, so that's a regular cadence, you get together as a team and talk about what's working well for us. What do we want to stop doing in our ways of working? What do we want to keep doing? Is there anything we want to celebrate? Any actions from this? And this is another potential friction point for the neurodiverse who struggle with being put on the spot. Because to do that well, you have to feel psychologically safe. And somebody who is constantly struggling with a highly synchronous communicative environment is not going to feel psychologically safe in a meeting which is about, hey, these are the things that I want to change. So one of the ways that I've tried to introduce retrospectives to teams like this is say, look, instead of spending all this time pitching the stuff you want to talk about at that meeting, do that asynchronously. There's a fantastic plugin on Jira called Easy Agile, where you can then map these retrospectives to a sprint. So it's all then easily discoverable and doing so in an automated way. So you're not having to rely on someone saving the file to the right place. It's just there. Don't have to think about it. But there you can raise issues you want to have in the retrospective, have that asynchronous discussion beforehand on it, comment it, vote on what items you want to discuss. And for rapid and psychologically safe decision making, I'm a big fan of there's a consensus gathering mechanism called fist to 5. The idea being that you all at the same time don't have to say anything, you just put up either fist 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fist being, I absolutely disagree with this, I will stop this happening, regardless of what everybody else says. 5 says, I absolutely love it, this is the best thing ever. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 in between. Look, that's worked great for the teams that I've introduced it to, but it's not going to work great for everybody. And I even am guilty of this myself, where it is very difficult to distinguish what is best practice in actuality compared to what has worked really well for me in my experience. And the two can be very different. So I'm sure there are teams, there might be people who are listening to today who are thinking, what, so we all have to do that all at once and you're put on the spot and you've only got a few seconds to decide. That sounds awful. I don't want to do that. And my response to that would be, it's your team. You should be the ones managing it. You're the ones who should be getting to decide. Now, again, this comes back to, does this reflect what's in reality?
Well, I think Andrew. Yep.
Sorry about that. If you've got a that is unsupportive of that, it's going to be difficult to do so.
I think it's what you're saying is it's continuously evolving, isn't it? You're trialing different things that can kind of work for for yourself, for your teams that you're working with, and you're taking learnings from this, and then, but without implementing these things, we won't know. So if it's just a case of this is how it's structured, this is how you meant to do it from the off, and that's it, and we're not going off and doing, like you mentioned, evolving and looking at different ways, then the structure will never evolve. So I think it's incredible that you're dissecting it in a way that it's going to be continuously evolving and continuously helping.
Yeah. And that's for me the benefit that I've had with Agile, but also where I'm seeing there's a lot of risk, because if you just implement something blindly, which is what is more commonly done, I really have to stress the state of Agile at the moment, and Agile in inverted commas there. Bad Agile is Agile implemented badly is a lot more common than that highly adaptive, continually improving organization. You're much more likely to run into, oh, we're Agile because we use Jira and we we all stand up 30 minutes at 9 a.m. type mentalities.
You mentioned as well, about kind of singling out and doing, putting on the spot. And these can be in training and coaching and in work environments as well, but it can also be just walking into the premise. Could be just walking into the office, say the water cooler talk, or just walking into a kitchen and making yourself a coffee to start the day, and then your boss walks in, or someone, supervisor or someone walks in, and they ask those questions which you mentioned. What you planning today? What does this look like? And those environments from which seems a nice environment to come in, to make yourself a coffee, to set yourself the day, having to think on the spot in those situations when even you're not into a meeting can be quite triggering.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that very having your boss comes over and asks you what you're up to. If you're using Scrum or Kanban or a similar methodology where you've got a board, if you're feeling psychologically safe enough to be able to do this, being able to say, look, just go look at my Scrum board. It's all up to date. That's everything I'm working on. And that it's up to date with all the states that work is in, and all the details of what that work is. Having these tools for excellent asynchronous communication. I struggle a lot with organization in my personal life, but my partner and I have actually joked about we need to put up a Kanban board somewhere in the house to actually track the jobs we need to be doing, because it is so effective for us as a way of managing work in the workplace, to have that single source of as long as this is up to date, everybody can see what I'm doing.
Yeah,
some people might be quite wary of that, and again, in low trust organizations, there is a risk when you've got that visibility of everything. Although that sort of low trust organization has probably bigger problems than inability to use a Scrum board, if it's so low trust that you're scared of actually telling people what you're up to.
It's interesting. I want to come back to that exactly. I just want to mention it's even when your boss. I remember back in corporate days, and even when your boss is not asking specifically what you're up to and what you're doing and stuff. It's almost the small talk that I got. I always remember after a weekend, and I would go into the office on Monday morning, I would be almost researching certain things that went on throughout the weekend, what shows, what football results, and I'd almost go in on a Monday morning having to think to myself, I need to have done something really good, or I know something to have this conversation just to be included within this. And I just remember coming out with nice elaborate things. Sometimes I'd be like, oh yeah, we went to the circus, or sometimes we played pickleball, or we did this. And sometimes and I go away thinking, why did I say that? And it's almost because of that, I'm not very good being put on the spot in some of the small conversations. And I just think, why have I lied? And I'm thinking, I'm not a liar, I don't lie. But it's those situations that you're put in where you have to kind of think to yourself, I need to come up with something. And you hear other people and they're just going, yeah, we didn't really do much, didn't do this. But it's funny, isn't it? How much those situations can impact you, even when you're not in work, thinking about what the conversations might be in those small environments.
Yeah, and I think that's something that is broadly taken for granted by people who are neurotypical, that a lot of what they see as nothing interactions do have a lot of emotional intensity to somebody who might struggle to handle them. Personally, and I can only speak with a very limited perspective, personally, I felt a bit of a shift since COVID. So as I said, I'm quite extroversion biased myself. I'm very chatty. I don't get to go to the pub so often these days. We've got 2 young kids. But back in the day, I was always that person who was chatting to other people, making mates at the bar or in the smoking area when I smoked. But actually in the office, headphones in, I don't want to talk to you unless we've got something booked where we're going to talk. And that might be an entirely different persona, putting on that facilitation, like coaching persona. But And unconsciously, I think there's probably something to the fact that I used the word persona there. I caught myself there. But I definitely feel as if there's less of an expectation since COVID. And maybe it's just because everybody else got out of practice and we're still actually struggling to deal with the post-pandemic in pandemic isolation. But I feel as if there's more understanding with not doing that. Maybe that's changing as offices start to require more in-person days. We're at the moment 3 days a week in the office, 2 days remote. But I don't know. We'll see.
How do you think organizations have done that then? Again, just a perspective on this, because we had, everyone working in an office 5 days a week, and all the, full time, all these different things. Then we had the pandemic. Then it was a case of, a good whole length of time with the isolation and all the different trauma that went through for people on a global scale. And then it was a case of, actually, we're going to filter you back into the office. We're going to start off with 1 day a week, 2 day a week, 3 day a week. And then it's, we actually need you back in there full time. Do you think there should have been more than just a staging process of, you're going to be now working 3 days in the office instead of 5? Do you think there could have been, in some offices they've probably done this, in work environments I'm not too sure, but do you think there should have been more of a support package around that element of coming back into the office, rather than just, you're now working in the office? It's almost like we don't want to talk about what everything that went on and how you worked before. It's just, you need to be back in the office. That's just the company policy.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the expectation that culture is just going to shift to pre-pandemic, but the reality is, even if you were fortunate enough to never get ill and nobody you knew got ill, even if you were fortunate enough for that, there is still trauma associated with isolation over a long period of time. And again, that's even if you're isolated as a group. There's plenty of studies on the impact of that, and we do sort of pretend in the workplace that that's not the case. Not in terms of, as individuals, we all acknowledge it, but there's no sort of organizational collective acknowledgement. And I'm not sure what can be done. I'd be interested to hear. So you're talking about what sort of elements of the support package, outside of things to account for, say, people who were working near the office who have then moved and gone fully remote, to those who perhaps brought in family members and started the family, and the sort of support for the in-pandemic changes. What sort of support things would you look at?
So I know there's obviously certain industries. When I was in the retail sector, we that was probably a continuation. They really they had to keep going. From delivery drivers to retail to nurses and everyone. The real key workers in that sense. But I guess it's almost like when you come into the office environment. I'm not saying that they need to do buffets and all these different things, but at least open up a portal of conversation, in the sense of, and this is again just speaking to different organizations and different people that worked in those environments, when they came back into the office, it was as if nothing had happened in that office environment. It was, they work the same in that process. But I still feel there was a lot of trauma that someone had. And again, the different ways of working. If you've been working from home for 2 years in an organization, or even a year and a half, that's a long time to adjust the way that you were working before. So when you come back into the organization, I think it was just a case of, there should have been, I'd hope to see more staging periods where there was more open conversations, more ways of, even facilitating in a slightly different way. I think the conversation, it starts, like you mentioned before, I think if we start with the conversation, then it branches out to what support is needed within this. And I know that is two ways at the end of the day, because the organization still needs people to work, and it still needs to continue to grow, and people, it's a 50-50 split. I understand that. But I just don't feel that when you walk into an organization that it was mentioned, it was questioned, it was just almost like you need to return. And why do you need to return? Because the office needs you. And we know now that the way that working remote, we're speaking now, via, a streaming platform has changed. I just think we just haven't fully helped. And I'm not saying all organizations, just don't think we fully helped that situation. That's just my views.
So one contrast pre and post pandemic, which again is just a limited perspective of the organization that I'm in, is pre-pandemic there was quite a social culture. And this had positives and benefits. I think there's definitely something to be said for the culture of doing a team night out, once a fortnight can actually be exclusionary to those who have young children to look after, or those who maybe don't drink, or those who struggle with social intensity. But that was something that used to be done. And now we see a lot less, where it's went from the norm to being the exception. And I do wonder if I'm generally not a proponent of corporate mandatory fun. I think that normally it is exclusionary at worst and cringeworthy at best. But those first few return to office days, way back, setting aside a couple of days just to be like, look, we're just going to socialize or re-socialize. We've become we went through an unsocialization period. We need to be re-socialized to facilitate those connections with each other, and slowly wind back in. And that could look very different for different teams. And I don't think that the default of we all go to the pub every other Friday is ultimately a positive thing. And if the expectation is you're going to do it after work, but you're taking people who spent every day working from home, then they're expected to go into the office, and then you're saying, oh, why aren't you then staying late to go hang out with your colleagues that you didn't see for months on end? Of course, they're not going to want to do that. They've lost that emotional connection to each other. And if you want to rebuild that, you're going to have to rebuild that during the working week, not 8 p.m. on a Friday.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost just having that plan in place, isn't it? And I agree. This fun element where it's a case of it can be a segregation. If there's a certain amount of people that can go to the pub afterwards and all these different things, then you start building those segregations in within the workplace. And I guess I just really kind of thought about it was so difficult for so many people in that situation from the working environment, and I get from the businesses as well. A lot of businesses were lost during that time, as well as. But it was just, I guess, it was just how I still don't feel that we've implemented it within organizations. I feel we've just kind of just smoothed over the top and said this is what we need to do going forward, and I think there definitely does need to be more inclusion in all different within organizations.
I think the real litmus test will be comparing the office Christmas parties before and after COVID. What is the attendance like? What sort of thing? And again, we do have a cultural standard of out of work entertainment involves alcohol as the norm, which might not necessarily be the healthiest of standards, and certainly not the most inclusionary of them. But as a standard that we can compare pre and post pandemic, I think anybody listening who is feeling some of this resonate with them, just draw up that comparison with Christmas parties pre pandemic.
Andrew, that we're going to leave our conversation on that. It's been an absolute phenomenal conversation. As I mentioned before, our conversation will go off in different ways, like a branches on trees. I didn't think we'd be talking about workplace recruitment and COVID and all the pandemic and all the different things. But honestly, I always use the analogy that I wake up like a sponge every day, wanting to absorb something and learn something, and I felt like I've learn in abundance with yourself, Andrew. It's absolutely fascinating what you do, and I really value your opinion on the conversations and topics that we've had.
And thank you for having me on. It's been an absolute joy.
Wonderful. Andrew, thank you so much again for all of your time and everything. And we will catch up with you. We'd love to have you back on future episodes with more and more kind of hard-hitting topics. But thank you so much again for your time, and we'll speak to you soon.
Speak to you soon. Cheers.
Thank you. So guys, that was Andrew. Thank you so much again for being an absolute phenomenal guest. We thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. Thank you so much again for all the people that watch this live and again on the replay, or if you're watching this on any other social media channels, then please do continue the conversation within the chat below. Thank you also to our sponsors, Sweet Social Media, and the link to their latest course will be in the blurb. Take care, peeps. We'll be back soon with another Neurodiversity Stories. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye.